loud. Let me try one more time. Yeah, it won't let me post. Dang it. Well,
Yeah.
Oh well. Nothing I can do about that one. Okay, I'm gonna let everybody in.
Cool. Woo.
Yay.
Oh. In Carlberg, cool.
In the Malthea, if you could just watch the waiting room too, since I'll be in screen share mode.
Yep.
I'm just gonna give everybody a minute to connect. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our monthly 350 Denver meeting. Tonight, hopefully you've had the opportunity to watch the movie, The Story of Plastic. If not, you can continue to watch. The link will still work for a little while. And tonight we're going to sort of talk about some of the things we learned from the issues or some stuff we talked about from the movie. I would just ask that you please put yourself on mute. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop those into the chat. And we will get to those questions at the end, questions and or comments at the end of the presentation. And with that, I am going to start sharing my screen. And I will turn it over to Liz, who's going to get us started off.
Good evening. Where does plastic come from? Broadly speaking, plastics are materials formed from organic polymers, long molecules made by linking together long chains of smaller molecules called monomers. These monomers are themselves products of a supply chain that almost always starts at a wellhead, oil rig, or coal mine. Virtually all plastics, over 99%, are produced from chemicals sourced from fossil fuels. What kinds of plastics are there? While there are a wide variety of different types of plastics, 5 kinds of plastics constitute over 90% by weight of all plastics produced. Polyethylene, 34.4%, polypropylene, 24.2%, polyvinyl chloride, 16.5%, polyethylene triethylene, 7.7%, polystyrene, 3.3%. What is driving the plastic boom? Cheap shale oil in the United States resulting from the fracking boom is fueling massive new investments in plastics infrastructure in the US and abroad, with 164 billion planned for 264 new facilities or expansion projects in the United States alone. Many projects, including the largest, remain in the construction or planning stages and face significant public opposition. China is also investing heavily in plastic infrastructure, including heavy investments in expensive, carbon-intensive, oil-to-olefins technology. The fracking boom is also fueling new plastic plants in Europe, which will rely heavily on a steady stream flow of American natural gas. A recent wave of plastics investments in the Middle East will further intensify the industry's search for new plastics markets and its efforts to increase plastics corruption. By 2025, production capacity is expected to increase by 33 to 36% for both polyethylene and propylene. If constructed, this massive expansion in capacity could lock in plastic production for decades, undermining efforts to reduce consumption and reverse the plastics crisis.
All right. So all of that is sort of distressing. So then we look at the other side. What is zero waste? Zero waste is an innovative approach to the use of resources. It ensures resource efficiency, such as resources not being wasted, resource recovery, resources that are reused or otherwise recycled or not burned or buried, and protection of scarce natural resources, such as use of renewable resources. Currently, we are operating on a linear system, a one-way path from resource extraction to production, to consumption, to disposal. The model is fundamentally unsustainable because it assumes that the resources are infinite, which they are not, and that the disposed items do not cause problems, which of course they do. Zero waste is a move away from this unsustainable linear industrial system into a circular system under which unnecessary extraction and consumption is minimized, waste is reduced, and products and materials are reused or recycled back into the market. Under a zero waste model, the resources that we use can be safely and economically recycled, reused, composted, or turned into biogas through anaerobic digestion, a type of composting. Zero waste also means avoiding the use of disposable products, redesigning products that are toxin-free, and built to last. Zero waste involves reducing consumption, reusing discards, product redesigns, shifts to alternative delivery systems, comprehensive recycling, a ban on waste incineration, comprehensive composting or biodigestion of organic materials, citizen and worker participation, policies, regulations, incentives, and financing structures to support these systems, and phasing out waste exports to other nations. So what are waste assessments and brand audits? Waste assessment and brand audit is a methodical process of collecting and analyzing waste to determine the amount and type of waste generated in a locality and which brands are responsible for producing that proportion of the waste found. Brand audits are one of Break Free from Plastic's most valuable tools to hold corporate plastic polluters accountable and demand a shift in the way that they deliver their products to people. In a nutshell, the brand audit is a coordinated process of recording data about the plastic waste items found during a cleanup, with a special focus on documenting the brand representation. By combining hard data, citizen science, and community organizing, brand audits have become a powerful tool for recording and tracking down the companies that are responsible for polluting the planet with plastic. Our most recent analysis of 2019's global data was published in Branded 2, identifying the world's top corporate plastic polluters, and revealed the following as the 2019 top 10 global polluters: Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, Mondelez International, Unilever, Mars, P&G, Colgate-Palmolive, Phillips Morris, and Perfetti Van Mil. Which brings us to, what are sachets and why are they problematic? Single portion plastic made from a multi-laminate material are used to package products as diverse as coffee and washing powder. They are low value, currently non-recyclable items that are easier and cheaper to produce and transport than bottles with tamper-proof lids. The uptake in some low and middle income countries has been huge. In India and Southeast Asian countries, sample size sachets of food and non-food products are estimated to account for 95% of the industry sales in terms of volume and 60% in terms of value. But while they may bring convenience and in some places a level of affordability, they're a significant contributor to the waste crisis and in many poor contexts. In Tier Fund and Waste Aid's survey on the impacts of plastic pollution and poverty, plastic sachets were the most commonly identified item among mismanaged solid waste. The scale of the problem is also apparent from waste audits. The prolific use of the sachets in many parts of Asia and Africa has been justified around arguments of accessibility. Many families are unable to afford standard sizes of new, often internationally owned branded products, so single-serve items are more accessible ways for them to access the products. In some cases, the cost per sachet is cheaper than larger packets, so it also drives wealthier people to buy them in bulk, for example, in India. However, in other countries such as Indonesia, the long-term cost of multiple sachets is considerably more than buying the full-sized item.
Is it my turn?
Yep.
Excellent. I wanted to go through a couple other potential alternatives here and some pros and cons. First, is paper a good alternative to plastic? Some companies are attempting to address their plastics problem by switching their disposable packaging from plastic to paper. In reality, this switch is problematic. Forests play an important role in our ecosystem. They support biodiversity, remove and store carbon from the atmosphere, and provide sustenance and livelihood to indigenous peoples and perform a range of ecological services. Meanwhile, logging and industrial tree plantations drive natural forest loss and degradation, emit carbon dioxide, and the availability of recycled paper, even currently produced, is not sufficient to meet demand, let alone if we see mass scale substitution from plastic packaging to paper. I have some notes here on bioplastics. I don't think we have a slide, but maybe I'll read them anyway. Just imagine a slide about bioplastics. It's all good. So many companies are swapping single-use plastics derived from fossil fuels with bio-based plastics, which are often falsely promoted as being biodegradable or compostable. As it turns out, the word bioplastics does not actually have a standardized definition. It's sort of like saying it's, all natural. It's often used to refer to plastic that is either bio-based, biodegradable, or compostable, and can even include fossil fuel-based plastic. The heat and humidity conditions required to actually degrade bio-based plastics are rarely, if ever, seen in the natural environment. And when that biodegradable plastic does break apart, it may not fully disappear. It can instead break down into smaller pieces, including microplastics, which can be ingested by animals and work their way up the food chain. The impression that bioplastics are more natural because they're from plants is also false. Production of bio-based plastic can involve similar chemical additives to conventional fossil fuel-based plastic. Some plastics also claim to be compostable, but not all municipalities have the industrial composting necessary and many cannot recycle compostable plastic packaging, so it is most likely to be landfilled or incinerated, which leads to our next slide. Is incineration or waste to energy a good solution to managing plastic waste? Waste to energy proponents make numerous false claims about waste to energy. You may be sensing a trend here among them, which is that it is zero waste. As it turns out, incineration and zero waste are incompatible. Waste to energy plants are incinerators. They don't magically make waste disappear. They transform the waste into other forms of pollution that are harder to dispose of and usually more toxic than the original waste. More than 90% of waste that is burned or sent to landfills can be reused, recycled, and composted. Waste to energy incinerators need to be continually fed, thus creating a never-ending demand for more waste. This encourages waste reduction and promotes waste generation. Waste to energy incinerators also pose risks to the health and environment of neighboring communities, as well as that of the general population. Even the most advanced incinerators release pollutants that contaminate air, soil, and water. And aside from toxic air emissions, incineration technologies produce highly toxic byproducts that are released into the environment. So can't corporations just recycle the plastic that they use? Fast-moving consumer goods and the plastics industry have long promoted the idea that recycling is the best way to keep plastic out of the landfill, effectively shifting the blame to us, the consumer. But more than 90% of all the plastic ever produced has not been recycled. Plastic is far more likely to end up in landfills, incinerators, or in the environment than to be recycled. Recycling stations cannot keep up with the huge volume of plastic waste that we generate every day. Certain plastic packaging like soda and water bottles, milk jugs, laundry detergent containers are commonly recyclable, but rates of recycling for these are actually shockingly low. Half of the PET plastic sold is never collected for recycling, and only 7% of those bottles collected for recycling are actually turned into new bottles. Much of the plastic packaging we see get recycled is actually downcycled, which means that instead of making a new plastic package from an old one, the plastic is reprocessed into products of lesser quality or value, which are not further recyclable and not possible to re-recycle. Flexible plastic packaging such as wrappers, sachets, pouches, shrink wrap, and snack bags are now all over the grocery stores. The market for those type of products grew by 19% in 2017. And this type of packaging is often made of multiple materials that make it difficult, if not impossible, to recycle.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad you guys are all here, and I hope if you have not had a chance to see the movie that you do. It's really interesting, infuriating, but it's really an interesting movie. So what is the impact of plastics on human health? At every stage of its life cycle, plastic poses distinct risks to human health, arising from both exposure to plastic particles themselves and associated chemicals. The majority of people worldwide are exposed at multiple stages of this life cycle. The first one is the extraction of oil and gas, particularly the use of hydraulic fracturing or fracking for natural gas. One more reason that we don't like fracking. It releases an array of toxic substances into the air and water, often in significant volumes. And then transforming the fossil fuel into plastic resins and additives releases carcinogenic and other highly toxic substances into the air. The use of plastic products leads to ingestion and or inhalation of large amounts of both microplastic particles and hundreds of toxic substances with carcinogenic, developmental, or endocrine disrupting impacts. All plastic waste management technologies, including incineration, co-incineration, gasification, and pyrolysis, result in the release of toxic metals such as lead and mercury, organic substances like dioxins and furans, acid gases, and other toxic substances to the air, water, and soils. Microplastics entering the human body via direct exposures through contact, ingestion, or inhalation can lead to an array of health impacts, including inflammation, genotoxicity, oxidative stress, apoptosis, and necrosis, which are linked to an array of negative health outcomes, including cancer, cardiovascular diseases, inflammatory bowel disease, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative diseases, and stroke. Not good. Most plastic additives are not bound to the polymer matrix and easily leach into the surrounding environment, including the air, water, food, or body tissues. As plastic particles continue to degrade, new surface areas are exposed, allowing continued leaching of additives from the core to the surface of the particle in the environment and the human body. Once plastic reaches the environment in the form of macro or microplastics, it contaminates and accumulates in food chains through agricultural soils, terrestrial and aquatic food chains, and the water supply. I'm just going to add one little note here. I don't know if anyone saw a few months ago, there was several studies done of the snowfall in the Rocky Mountains, and they found little tiny bits of microplastic in our snow in the mountains. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. What is the global waste trade? Well, that's when wealthy countries that had grown accustomed to exporting their plastic problems with little thought or effort to ensure that the plastic they were exporting got recycled and did not harm other countries. North Americans and Europeans exported not just their plastic waste, but the pollution that went with getting rid of it. Plastic waste and the environmental and health problems it causes is diverted to other shores, stressing infrastructure and amplifying the problems of plastic pollution in lower income countries awash in the trash of healthy nations. The dangers faced by people working in the waste trade underline the ultimate truth about plastic waste. Recycling is just not enough. The global plastic waste trade puts people and communities at risk. It has long-term impacts on health and the environment and enables the continued production of new plastics and its unchecked consumption. It is treated as a solution to plastic waste, but in reality, a scant 9% of the plastic the world has produced since 1950 has been recycled. Okay, so what is the Break Free from Plastic movement? Take action. Okay, I can't see this whole thing. Hold on just a sec, sorry. We are calling for corporate responsibility and pushing for public policy that puts human and environmental health above the corporate profit. There are multiple active campaigns that need your support. Visit the Story of Plastic website to find an active campaign near where you live or near to your heart. So storyofplastic.org, take action, or at the breakfreefromplastic.org.
All right, thank you everybody so much. I'm going to run through some of the myths surrounding plastics, but I did want to let you know that 350 Colorado is also going to be working on some state level plastics legislation beginning for the 2021 session that kind of got dismissed because of COVID this year, and hopefully we'll get it passed next year. And I will give you some contact information in a follow-up email that will also contain the information from this presentation, as well as a massive amount of resources that were provided to us by the film producers, so that you can review that information as well if you want it. Okay, so let's talk about myth number one. The first myth that has been propounded by the plastics industry is that plastics are important in the fight against coronavirus. The plastics industry is exploiting this moment of crisis to push plastic production and use. They are doubling down on their narrative that in the age of COVID, plastic is the safest and most hygienic material for delivering products to consumers, regardless of the fact that the coronavirus can survive in a transmittable form on plastic. However, they fail to address how virus-contaminated waste will be dealt with across the full life cycle of their products, even though we know plastic waste can compromise human health, especially in vulnerable communities who are facing the brunt of pollution to begin with. Although health and safety must be the #1 priority for everyone at this time, all steps should be on the basis of science, not to advance pro-disposable plastic agendas and legislation. Single-use disposable items are not necessarily safer than properly washed reusables, as they can harbor viruses and pathogenic bacteria, including exposure during the manufacture, transport, and storage processes leading up to the eventual use. Medical experts are on the record explaining that soap and hot water are effective at killing coronavirus on reusable items. The second myth is that all plastics are recyclable. Although all plastics are technically recyclable in a laboratory, what's possible in a lab has little significance in addressing the plastics crisis. What's downplayed by the plastics industry is that recycling is subject to markets and market prices, and recycled material is rarely cost competitive. The collection and storing of materials, the cost of infrastructure and running recycling programs, and the lack of incentive for companies to use recycled content contribute to why only a fraction of plastic gets recycled. The next myth is that plastics are better for the environment. And while it's true that plastic has enabled lighter packaging material that weighs less to transport, that same shift to disposable plastic packaging has normalized a wasteful throwaway culture, causing widespread environmental damage. Many life cycle analyses of plastics, often industry funded, fail to assess the true scale of the environmental afterlife associated with plastic. Furthermore, the plastics industry is now one of the fastest growing contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, accelerating the heating of our planet. According to CIEL, in the next 10 years alone, emissions from the collective plastics life cycle could reach the equivalent to 295 coal-fired power plants. The next myth is that plastics is an ocean problem. As the story of plastic exposes, plastic polluters at each stage of its life cycle, from extraction, refinery, exposure to toxic chemicals, through end-of-life, landfill, incineration, and the well-established problems of plastic leaking into the environment. Framing plastics as an oceans problem enables its proponents to characterize the plastics crisis as a waste management problem, one that can always be improved through innovation, infrastructure, and a tweak here or there, which we now know to be a false narrative. The next myth is that consumer education is the key to overcoming plastic pollution. This idea has been a key argument made by major consumer brands since the 1970s, involving public relations campaigns to direct the responsibility for plastic pollution to the consumer and away from the producer, symbolized by the infamous Crying Indian PSA. The idea is that if we can just get enough people to do the right thing, the problem will disappear. This argument is, however, flawed on several levels. The problem as it exists today would not be resolved by responsible consumer behavior. The global waste trade is evidence that even the richest global north countries are not able to manage their waste responsibly. The plastics crisis has exposed the need to reevaluate our linear make-use waste system and transition towards a circular zero waste model. The next myth is that regulating packaging materials is overburdening businesses. Part of the reason that single-use plastic is ubiquitous is because it's cheap. Its low price is derived in part from the fact that plastic externalizes its litany of social, environmental, and health costs onto citizens, often at the expense of taxpayer and vulnerable communities. This includes the health impacts to frontline and fence-line communities, the cost of litter cleanup, and of managing landfill and recycling programs. If plastics manufacturers couldn't obscure these costs, its price would be less competitive. That's why increasingly states and countries are exploring extended producer responsibility laws that are redirecting some of these costs back to producers. In doing so, incentivizing companies to reevaluate their delivery models and use of single-use plastics. So that concludes our presentation. And we would like to, if we can, open it up to any questions or comments that anybody might have. Please feel free to post them in the chat. If not, we have a few discussion questions from the filmmakers. And maybe I'll just ask one of those to get us started. The heroes featured in the story of plastic are working on the problem across all fronts, from petrochemicals to ocean pollution to zero waste. Did you identify with any of the heroes, and how so? And feel free to take yourself off mute if you would like to speak.
Well, I think most of us are fighting the good fight of confronting the COGCC, the CDPHE Air Quality Control Commission, and EPA. I testified at EPA today. So I think most of us are trying to do what we can to fight the fight to get some of this stopped.
Awesome. Thank you, Jan. The next question is, the story of plastic illustrates how we can't recycle our way out of the plastics pollution crisis. What steps can we take to address the problem at the source? Does the film make you question your own or your school's or your company's plastic use or recycling methods? And what can you do to address the problem? And I will kick it off by saying that I am in the process of joining or having 350 Colorado join a coalition that's working on legislation to ban polystyrene, which is known as styrofoam, and single-use plastics such as plastic bags, coffee stirrers, and other items that are absolutely not recyclable at this time.
I always find this an interesting challenge because I come to it from the perspective of a lot of health issues, and cross-contamination is like a major problem for a lot of us. And so a lot of the, decisions about how to get around this, if you go to, grocery store models where people are refilling from hoppers and all of that sort of thing, really dramatically increase my risk of dying of food cross-contamination. So it creates some kind of interesting challenges to figure out, how do we deal with that at scale and not, risk people's lives in the process, because that's one of the weird side effects that plastic has had, is making everything individually sealed has, to some extent, limited, contamination issues. But I don't know that I have any magic answers, but it's something that I think is always worth considering on the subject.
Watching the film, I was squirming about, oh, I use those things. Oh, I shouldn't do that. But I also found the really most significant piece out of the film was the way it completely reframed the problem. It wasn't that we need to figure out how to deal with this perfectly natural and necessary waste. It's we need to say, this stuff isn't necessary at all. To point the problem back at us as individuals or at communities is the horror of what's been done over the last 60 or 70 years. And I was profoundly struck by the notion that we simply have to call out the plastics industry and say, no, the problem is yours, it's not ours.
Absolutely.
I was I missed a couple points because I had a phone call in the middle of this, but one of the things that was disturbing lately is that they're saying that now these plastic companies are trying to get the country of Kenya to take all their plastic, and they're trying to change Kenya's own environmental laws to do so. It just feels like these big corporations are trying to run roughshod, over anybody or anything that they think they can. And I'm not quite sure how we might be able to stop something that's happening in another part of the world, another continent, but
they're absorbing our waste. So
yeah,
that's the biggest problem. And Asia stopped taking it because they're full. And the US is got 4% of the population, but responsible for 1/4 of the world's waste. Put that in big perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
It really struck me to be thinking about systems and how to work to change systems, because although I saw, oh yeah, I use this sometimes, but the truth is that I already, the contribution that I'm making from the occasional, like, oh, I'm getting this as a to-go thing instead of packing in my little containers like I usually do, like, it's such a small contribution compared to thinking about the whole picture and thinking about the companies. You know, it's shocking to me that at this point, when we know so much about climate change, these companies are just planning to go on into the future and make this bigger and more. And so it got me really thinking, what do we do to change the systems? Because even if I individually swear off every piece of plastic forever, that's not going to do much if we don't tackle it on a bigger level, you know?
I was kind of shocked from the movie to learn that the production of plastic has accelerated in the last like 20 to 25 years. And that, you know, obviously the problem with plastic pollution has increased, you know, right along with that. So even though we've been using plastics for 70 years or more, it's the last 20 years that have really contributed to what's going on right now.
And obviously, the fossil fuel companies are realizing that most of the major large populated countries are switching over to renewables energy, at least. And so they're hedging their bets on plastics. And as a way to continue to sell their fossil fuels and make profits, as they're realizing, you know, massive downturn in fossil fuel use for electricity, and hopefully none soon, and none in the transportation sector or agricultural sector as well. So this is their next bet.
I was pleased to note that there is, on the national level, a legislation that's being considered that would make the companies responsible. They would have to also, part of it is they would have to give refunds for their products and things like that. And I thought that, I remembered back when I was very young, when we collected beer bottles and got money for collecting them and things like that. And it wasn't too long ago, homeless people would collect cans for getting basic monies. And putting the problem really at the feet of the organizations, to me, as others have said, is a real shift, because I can buy into the guilt of not recycling.
If I can follow on to what Liz was just talking about, my fear is that if they go to legislation that lets them charge an extra fee, like a deposit fee that you have to turn in it to reclaim, that's effectively just shoving the burden back on consumers again. It's not really making them be responsible, because they're going to collect the money when you buy the product. So we're either paying for, you know, it's shoving it back onto the consumer. So I hope who's ever working on legislation for this isn't going in that direction, because that's really not having the responsible companies bear the burden.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of that. Like maybe 10 years ago, I visited Thailand, and like they don't use much plastic bottles in terms of, like, it's just not very popular there. And part of the reason is because they actually offer incentives to return the glass bottles. And so everything is sold in glass bottles. And they'll, like, if you don't understand the norms, like they followed me down the street to you know, sort of laugh their way toward trying to explain to me through pantomime that they needed the bottle back for the deposit because it mattered that much to them. So, you know, maybe if you're clever about it, you can use that tool, but make it a refund on alternatives to plastic instead.
Or a rental. When I was in South Africa, we went to Woodstock, which is this massive food, art, and music festival that they do like every Sunday during the warmer times of the year. And you can like buy a glass of wine and a treat, but you have to return the glass and the plate before you leave, or you lose your $2 or $5 or whatever it was that you put down as a deposit on the plate. And so you didn't see a lot of plastic waste in those types of countries. In Indonesia, they didn't really sell a lot of plastics, but there was garbage everywhere. and they all told me it came from America. So, just something to think about, but there was garbage everywhere. And a lot of it did get dumped in those countries from the Western countries. So, next question is, how might we reimagine a future without single-use plastics? What kinds of policies and systems might we implement both in our communities and on a wider scale to help us get there? And I know we've kind of talked about some of these, but if anybody else had any other thoughts or ideas, feel free to share.
It's me again. I'm thinking that one of the issues that we have as Americans is that more so than the rest of the world, and at least any of the places I've ever traveled, is our insistence, I guess you'd call it, on everything being easy, convenient, and fast. Like the whole instant gratification thing is so ingrained right now in the fabric of our nation, you know, like the pandemic was actually good in that a lot of people who never even learned to cook maybe learned to cook, you know, because it was, you know, you think about what we've exported other than plastic. It's been things like fast food and, you know, real junk food actually of all kinds. And it's just because in some ways it's a cultural problem. So it's almost like we have to reimagine our culture, like start slowing down and being more intentional in who we are and what we really want and need. And I don't see that policy alone is going to solve it.
And who is the we who's imagining?
Well, I'm a we, like, I've been, you know, really into like things like regenerative agriculture. Like I only like buy things, I try to buy things that I know where the supply chain is. And, you know, I've been even switching things as I find them, you know, to try and plastic free my house. Like I've finally, you know, found Bite, which is like a toothpaste, but it's not a toothpaste, it's a little tablet. So it just no plastic tubes, you know, like you look at plastic, it's just every dang place I look, you know, it's like almost everything you use has plastic in it. And obviously what was really amazing to me in the movie was realizing that I'm barely older than plastic, you know, or around the same age as plastic that before I was around. And I'm 62, that's so, just so you know, that people hadn't heard of it, didn't use it. It was a brand new thing. And somehow it just took off. And obviously people live fine without it all those years. And it just seems like we should be able to do that again if we could just kind of ask our grandparents or something what they did.
Right.
Well,
Wendy, I have a question for you because I noticed in that one slide in the presentation tonight, that woman that was sitting with all those sachet packets also had a bunch of toothpaste tubes in front of her. And I have been also very worried about, you know, those stupid toothpaste tubes. And you said you have found something called Bite?
Yeah, look it up. It's called Bite. They produce something that cleans your teeth really great, even a mouthwash and even dental floss. That initially they're like little, the toothpaste and the mouthwash are like little tiny tablets, and you put one in your mouth and you bite it, it'll start foaming, and then you got to brush as you do that. I haven't tried the mouthwash, but I have their toothpaste. I don't really use mouthwash. Their toothpaste and the floss comes in a glass jar, and it's a subscription, so they send you refills, but in a little paper container. So you only get one glass jar, and you just keep refilling it.
Cool.
And I
So
love
you-
that. And it's a
Okay.
great, my teeth are just as clean as any other kind of toothpaste I've ever used. And it doesn't taste awful. It probably takes a day or two to get used to because it's different.
Okay.
But it's
So you get it online
online.
from the company itself, and it's BITE.
Right. And then like with toilet paper, I don't like that coming in plastic. So I subscribe to Who Gives a Crap because they also build toilets places. And then I try to find everything. And then this place called Clean Cult, which is based out of Puerto Rico, which really needs the money. Clean Cult sends you cleaner stuff in totally recyclable containers like milk cartons and stuff. They don't use plastic. So I'm trying to find, if anybody else has other clues, there's so many ways I'm trying to get rid of plastic, but it's so hard to find substitutes sometimes.
I follow a lot of anti-consumerism groups, and they often have some kind of remarkable suggestions too about like, I mean, you use baking soda to brush your teeth, and then, you know, it came in a cardboard box that you can recycle instead of having all those plastic tubes. There's like, you know, the no poo movement, which is about like getting rid of the use of shampoo and conditioner and all of that sort of thing, and instead going back to, you know, kind of letting your hair develop its own oils and distributing those and that sort of thing, which also cuts down on all of your daily plastic uses. There's like a lot of them don't necessarily frame it that way, but a lot of their suggestions ultimately do dramatically reduce plastic. So that's a place to look too.
And then, I mean, these are all individual and non-systemic things, which is not great. But I think if consumer demands change, I mean, we saw that with organic food and things like that. I think it causes companies to change. And then TerraCycle, if you haven't heard of TerraCycle, look them up because they actually do a good job of pressuring companies to take back their stuff and recycle them into something. They partner with companies. So you could look at, like right now, Gillette is taking all disposable razors and blades and stuff back. And, you know, they have different brands that'll do that. And I sign up for every campaign. And sometimes I live in a co-housing community, so I'll just put out a thing on the email saying, I've got this box. If you guys use any of this stuff, please drop your leftovers in this box and I'll ship it. You get to ship it for free to them. And something good hopefully happens out of it, and hopefully it doesn't end up in a dump. So that's another strategy for cleaning up our waste rather than putting it in the trash can or hoping that putting it in recycling gets it recycled, which we know it doesn't. So TerraCycle is a good option for that.
On a more systemic basis, I also think localizing your food supply so that you know your farmer. You're going and picking it up in a cardboard box or a, you know, reusable bag or whatever, instead of going to the grocery store and getting like your oranges individually wrapped in saran wrap instead of their peel and dumb things they do. So,
I know that's really dumb. The one question I have, if anybody can help me with this, is like freezer food. You know, like you buy something frozen, which we do have to do here because we are in a state where, you know, there's certain items that you can never get year round, or you know, they just come that way. Like if you you know, buy frozen vegetables or buy meat or buy anything, it comes in plastic. I don't know what a solution is for that.
I actually order a lot of my meat. I mean, you know, occasionally I have to do something in urgent situations, but like most of my meat I actually order from people who are raising the animals. And if you do that, you can ask the people who are doing the butchering to just wrap it in paper for you. And so that can take care of most of your plastic meat supply. I mean, sometimes the paper is plastic lined depending on what they're using, but it's still a whole lot less plastic at least. So, you know, it's not always a perfect solution, but it's an improvement.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I have a question about, you know, we saw this movie at the Boulder Film Festival, and it just really made an impression around this idea that, you know, what's driving it is not our demand so much as oversupply making up markets and pushing them on, you know, unsuspecting populations all across the world. And I got super anxious on seeing that news this week, you know, that had been referenced about, you know, the fossil fuels industry quietly going to Kenya to try to, because they see that their market is going to disappear. And my rudimentary understanding of, you know, the chemistry of fossil fuels is that they really can just take the same resources out of the ground and change the way they process them. And if they can't sell it as fuel, they'll sell it as more plastic. So it really seems to me like this global moment of truth. And I don't know enough about this. Is there something along the lines of a Paris Accord kind of global coalition that is trying to gather momentum that, you know, it's somehow possible to be a part of?
No, but that's a really good idea.
Well, and the people who
Sure,
made
a Paris Accord. Let's just go do that.
the people who
Plastic
made the
Accord.
story of plastics thing also did have a, you know, 140 organizations they were working with or some number like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they're trying to kind of start to build that coalition of lots and lots of people working on it. So we can, you know, check out their URL that came with the movie.
Sunny,
Yes.
I'm on that coalition that you're going to be working with at the state legislature.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited.
And how many of you have read Rachel Maddow's Blowout?
Which one?
Her book called Blowout.
Oh, okay. I have.
That tells you everything you need to know about the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, she just loves them. I have to say one of the best campaigns and one of the most effective campaigns that I've read about was one that was in the UK. And basically activists went into the grocery store and they took all the plastic wrapping off the fruits and vegetables and left it. Where there would normally be fruits and vegetables, and the amount of plastic that was there was just absolutely incredible. And they took and posted pictures. That grocery store chain later changed their practice, and they started bundling like cucumbers and banana leaves and other items that could be actually composted and biodegrade, as opposed to this non-biodegradable plastic that we keep hearing about that's so great and wonderful. But there's a lot of also sort of plant-based alternatives that can be used. You know, like if you want to pick up a bag of apples, you pick up a banana leaf full of apples or something, and then, you know, it's easy to carry, I'm sorry. Or, you know, something of that nature. If you wanted to put your cheese in there, instead of wrapping it in plastic, you could wrap it in something like a banana leaf. So I thought that was a really cool campaign.
Oh, back to the freezer question. I have sometimes, you can get from like natural grocer, places like that, probably Whole Foods too. You can get fabric that is wax dipped. And I have used that sometimes if it's something that's just, you know, got a little bit of moisture to it. Like it doesn't work to put soup in the freezer, but you can wrap something like meat in it and you know.
You can buy those at Etsy, etee.com. They sell those wax-based things that you can wrap in instead of plastic. I actually own some.
Mm-hmm.
They work really well to like cover something to put in the fridge or the freezer. And you can wash them and reuse them like 500 times. And then they're made from organic cotton and all natural ingredients. So they also biodegrade.
And if I'm doing like soup or something, I actually have some silicone, which is, you know, somewhat less problematic and can be reused a lot instead of Ziploc bags that I will put things like soup or really liquid stuff in. And then I can freeze those and just keep reusing the bags.
You can freeze canning jars.
Although
Canning
I'm not
jars.
very good at it.
You gotta watch the liquid level, but yeah, exactly.
I got this bag from Mexico, and it's, I think it's kind of like a hemp, and then a leather strip. And I found it's really good for shopping, and you can put a lot of things in it.
Awesome.
I wanted, sorry, I was going to say on a systems level, one thing that I really wonder about is all the packaging for, I mean, not just food, because I think that is an issue we think about, and cross-contamination is also a legitimate issue, but like, there's not cross-contamination in the toy aisle, you know, I mean, there could be a little bit, but you know what I mean, right? Like, if a kid comes through with their fingers coated, but generally, you know,
Hopefully
so much of the stuff,
the toys.
right. I mean, I think about, you know, when I first had my oldest child 12 years ago, and we got these gifts, and there was so much packaging, so much of the packaging that is, it's theft deterrent, right? They put the packaging on to keep people from stealing stuff, to reduce the losses at the store. And there's so much of it, and you absolutely cannot reuse or recycle those things. And to me, it feels like that should be a priority, because it's just, I mean, you can't do anything with it. You know, anything you buy, if you buy a metal toy car, it comes in these plastic you know, things with indentations for each little car to go in on the cardboard with more plastic. It's just, it's ridiculous, you know, and there's no good reason for it. You know, we order from Scholastic. If we order a set of, you know, 3 books in the series, it comes wrapped in plastic. Like, that's what twine used to be for, right? You tie a little knot around it. And I feel like that kind of packaging, just, I understand why it's convenient and easier for stores, but it's really hurting us all. And it's something that seems like
It's also
we could go after.
They also use it to make everything square on a pallet, which is
absolutely right. But yeah.
Sunny, I was hoping that you would say a little bit more about what you're involved in as far as a 350.org initiative.
Yeah.
Well, this year we were working in coalition to drive people to testify regarding a couple of bills that were pending in the state legislature, which looked like they were going to pass pre-COVID. The first bill was a ban on single-use plastics, which included plastic bags, coffee stirrers, and I believe a couple other items that are just either too small to recycle, or like plastic bags or packaging absolutely cannot be recycled at this time. And also a ban on polystyrene, which is styrofoam, which cannot be reused ever, and it just sits in the environment and leaches toxic chemicals into the ground for a very, very, very long time, hundreds of years, basically. Both of those bills, because that false narrative pushed by the fossil fuel companies that plastics were safer than like canvas or paper, and it was actually also pushed by the governor. Both of those bills were dropped because of the COVID pandemic. We now know that that is, you know, sort of a false narrative, that coronavirus does live on plastics, and it's, you know, a little bit more difficult to wash all of that than just throw your recycle bags in the washer when after you go shopping. So we're hoping, my meeting today kind of got postponed a little bit, so I was hoping to have more news for you on exactly what's going to be introduced. But I know that plastics is being looked at as sort of a top priority for 2021, at least for that coalition, and hopefully for the state legislator. I'm hoping to have more news maybe by our next meeting, because I think it would be really valuable and important, instead of pushing for more recycling centers and encouraging more recycling, to try to reduce some of this waste first.
I would love to see some incentives for alternatives too. Like I have friends who are totally into like the permaculture geekery of like, let's have mushrooms grown in forms to use as packing materials instead of polystyrene and things that are like, but they don't have the money to get it off the ground on a large scale. So I would love to see some money put together for, let's really like invest in some alternatives. And if you can come to me with a great business plan, a proposal for how this alternative is sustainable and, whatever, I would love to see that happen, that they get some funding for that.
Yeah, and that single-use plastics ban bill also contained a 10-cent paper bag fee to encourage people to use reusable bags because, just generating more waste from a different source is still creating that waste that we need to get away from in that convenience society that somebody had mentioned earlier.
Was that a state level initiative or a city or county level?
It's state legislation.
Okay.
So it was actually introduced in the House, and I did testify I was actually in the Capitol testifying on the air toxics bill, and I walked across the hallway waiting for that bill to be called and testified during the plastics bill. So it worked out nicely. It just, for once, didn't have to go back. But something will probably, hopefully, be reintroduced next year. With the state legislation, it's really difficult to gauge because we're expected to have a massive shortfall in the budget again. And that's why a lot of the bills got chopped or were killed, was because the state can't afford them. And hopefully we're not put into that position. I don't think a ban would cost any money. It might even raise money for enforcement levels and a tax if we're taxing the alternative wasteful paper bag. So we'll see. And like I said, I was supposed to have a meeting today with one of the people in that coalition, and it got canceled due to car trouble. So I'll hopefully have more info next meeting.
One of the issues we had was the preemption bill that Angela Williams voted against like right away and killed.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to try and do preemption again to get some of this stuff passed.
Yeah, and for anybody that doesn't know, the preemption bill would have allowed localities like Denver and Boulder to enact their own bans, because right now only the state can do that. Denver itself is a home rule city, so our ordinances would override that state legislation to some extent. But just in case you didn't know what that was. And thank you, Jan. And if you have any more information, please feel free to share.
I do. They're going to try and do one big bill is what the last I heard. Danny Katz is working on this from Colorado PERG. And he was going to try and combine everything into one big bill and hopefully not have any kind of money attached to it. Part of the problem last year was one of the bills didn't even get past the committee because somebody attached a fiscal note to it. And I guess legislators can do that. They can just attach money to it. Like, how would this be reinforced? And then it would take a full-time person. And so that attached a physical note to it.
I kind of lost track of everything after COVID and just let some of those bills pass through my mind, but I'm remembering now. And Angela Williams also took issue with a lot of bills. So she's definitely somebody that needs to be worked on next session.
I don't think she's up again. I think she's term limited.
Is she? Oh, even better.
That's what I heard, and that is good news to me.
She was, for anybody who doesn't know, she kiboshed a few bills last session, including the preemption bill and another bill that would have studied community choice energy. And she was also one of the people who was having issues with Senate Bill 181, which passed in 2019. And that was the one that made fracking permits, had to be issued in the interest of public health and safety over corporate profits. And she was fought that bill for the longest time. She eventually ended up voting yes with all the amendments, but she was the difficult one of the difficult ones, Democrats too. So, yay. So that this will be our last discussion question. So as you saw in the film, corporations, including the oil and gas industries and food, beverage, consumer goods, and retail industries, have been pushing the pro-plastics narrative for decades. What pro-plastic narratives do you notice around you in the world today?
Much of the clothing industry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people don't think about it, but that's what your nylon and polyester and all of those things are. And the ways in which they're marketed and all of the like sporting goods stuff, the neoprene and, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to find clothes without polyester or nylon or rayon or some on in them.
I'm troubled by all the water bottles
Mm-hmm.
that are promoted and sold. Well, instead of us having our own water containers and things like that.
Especially when they're just bottling tap water. It's like baffling to me. Like, unless you're like in, you know, someplace with lead pipes or something and, you know, trying to counteract that. Like,
I know it's almost what people need to know is that water is actually much more unhealthy because it is tap water, but it's tap water that now has plastic residue inside it, and it's really unhealthy, especially if it's sat around for a while. So somehow if we could make that like, hey, you're hurting yourself drinking this stuff. Again, I think it is that convenience thing, like, oh, I'll just grab something, or I don't know. It's crazy. Maybe they could put it in cans, you know, water.
Yeah.
It's still a waste of resources, a total waste.
Mm-hmm. I'm troubled by the fast food places where people buy their coffee and drinks in plastic containers and then they walk around the lake and throw it in the trash.
Yeah.
One-use containers and all the straws too.
Straws are the worst. That was the other thing that was going to be banned in that state bill. Coffee stirrers and plastic straws, which could be available upon request for people who needed them, because there are people with disabilities who do need a straw to drink, but they would be the only ones that would be available to get a free straw. Otherwise, you have to pay for your plastic straw, which I think is nice too, to sort of change or have people rethink their behaviors so that we stop producing plastic straws.
There are a lot of places that don't offer plastic straws now, which I love. And do we not have a ban here? I guess I'm getting mixed up with Hawaii, because Hawaii banned plastic straws when I was living there, as well as single-use bags, which was so great. I mean, getting back to the single-use bags, because the beaches were littered with plastic bags, and people went ballistic when they started the ban. And then people just got used to it, and we're so happy that there were plastic bags all over the beach. So I think if we kind of, gear people towards realizing that it's not the end of the world if you don't have a plastic bag, that there's a lot of education we need to do, I guess, on that.
Absolutely.
I think part of the problem is we talk about our individual freedoms to wear a mask, to have plastic bags, and we forget we're part of a wider community, and then that wider community of the web of life. And I think part of what we need to do is change how we view ourselves and our relationship to the rest of creation.
Right. And so we do have a comment here from Lay, who says, has anybody worked with the Industrial Packaging Alliance of North America, which is the primary association representing the interests of manufacturers of new industrial packaging and their suppliers in North America? Its goals include raising the visibility of industrial packaging and emphasizing its importance in the safe and reliable transport of goods throughout North America and the world.
Well, I was confused by Lee's comment because I was unclear whether she was saying that it was a good thing or a bad thing, this alliance. So maybe Lee, you can comment on that.
I find it astonishing that even in their promotional materials, they're not talking about the environment. You know, so I know I remember a friend of mine, not a friend, but I was at a friend's party and there was a woman there who made pies for a living. And we were talking about the, you know, the ridiculous plastic that they, you know, the pies come in at the grocery store. And she said a lot of that is dictated by, I don't remember what organization she said, but I assume this organization or another one like it. And it just seems like if I mean, you never hear about these guys, you know, I mean, radios and websites talk about plastics all the time. I've never heard anybody refer to these guys. And these are the guys that are setting the standards. So it seems to me if we had more transparency, find out who's on them, who's working with them, you know, and try and get meetings and put pressure, show up if they have public meet, you know, the whole 9 yards, you know, maybe we could make a little progress. I don't know enough about it to like say, this is what we should do. I was just surprised to hear that there was such an organization. I always assumed every company just decided for itself how it wants to package its products. But if this association and other organizations are saying you have to do this, that, or the other, or you want, you know, or to get certified, or it might even be in a law, I don't know. But I was just hoping to get more information about it because it seems pretty critical.
Yeah, it's not the only subject about which we need to like rethink who the gatekeepers are. Like there's a lot of pesticides that are used because there's rules in place that you can only have a certain number of buggy pieces of fruit to ship it out of state to whatever place. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of things within the environmental umbrella that there is some gatekeeper along the way who is enforcing bad policy for some usually cosmetic or financial gain that we really need to figure out how to tackle.
Yeah. And that, you know, safety, they may be considering bugs, you know, bacteria and things like that, but poisons aren't very safe.
Right.
Yeah, really.
We could get something from the bug, but we'll also get something from the poison. So not sure we've really upgraded there.
not sure they're looking at it, you know?
Yeah.
Not sure they're having witnesses talking about it and educating themselves. And then you up the pressure.
Absolutely. Education is key, right?
First comes the education and then comes the pressure.
Absolutely. That's kind of how organizing works, right? We're here to educate you. Now we're going to pressure others.
Now that you know better and you're not doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Expose you and, you know, whatever.
I mean, that's kind of the whole premise of nonviolent direct action. You know, you start with asking nicely and then you keep getting more urgent about your demands.
Like going into a store and taking all the plastic wrap off everything and leaving it.
Right. Making a giant pile.
And taking lots of pictures of the giant pile and then showing how little you actually have in your cart from that giant pile. We do have another question from, I mean, I'm so sorry if I butcher your name, Rabia. And it says, or comment, I should say, it says rayon is cellulose based. From what I understand, it should be biodegradable. And I think that's true, but I think the process currently used by industrial manufacturers to create rayon is toxic. And I don't really know enough about rayon to comment either way because I don't wear it if I can avoid it. If anybody else knows, but that's my understanding is the process used to create it is toxic. And
Yeah,
toxic chemicals are used.
The process is toxic, and it also causes a lot of deforestation. The material itself, whether you're using, you know, trees or bamboo or what to make it, is not necessarily a problem and is theoretically biodegradable, but the process is pretty ugly.
Do we have any other questions or comments? If I see one more, my chat is being really weird tonight, sorry. I can't seem to get down there. It doesn't want to let me go down. Zoom is being funky tonight. It also wouldn't let us live stream to Facebook. So, oh, it's a thanks. Awesome. So I want to thank everybody so much for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the movie. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, you can watch it still. It should be available for a couple more weeks. I would just ask that you don't share the link. We only got 100 views, and we had 96 people RSVP for the link. And once the meeting, this recording from this meeting is downloaded, I'll have our 350 Colorado team upload it to the 350 Colorado YouTube channel. And then I'll send around an email with that link, as well as the film producers were so awesome for this. They gave me this giant, like, page or two of just links you can click for resources, and it groups it by topic. And I'll also include the information from this presentation so that you'll have all of that as well. And I will include some information about how you can get involved in some of our legislative campaigns, like this plastics one, if we do decide to join the coalition, which I hope we do again. And then if you're interested in doing anything at the local Denver level, since we are a 350 Denver team, we would certainly invite you and can give you the resources, help, and support to do that if anybody is interested. And you can reach us. I'm going to type our email into the chat. That's how you can reach us. It's metrodenver@350colorado.org. And if there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you so much again, and thank you to our wonderful 350 Denver leadership team for presenting tonight. You're amazing.
Yes.
And I hope everybody has an awesome night, and hopefully we'll see you next month, where we'll be discussing a couple of the state and local Denver initiatives. Provided we can get our speakers lined up. So look for that email, and please RSVP. We hope to see you there. And if anybody else has any other announcements about upcoming events or anything exciting, please feel free to share.
Thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah.
I love the
Really
discussion stuff.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody, and have a good night. And we hope to see you next month, first Tuesday of the month, same time, different Zoom channel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.